we've got Alexander Bard, we've got Cadell Last, we've got Raven Connolly, and we're talking about the sexual apocalypse and the dark renaissance. I pointed out that the word apocalypse means a disclosure or revelation of great knowledge. And I want to know, I want to hear from Raven first and ask her what these two terms mean to her, sexual apocalypse and dark renaissance.
Yeah, so the way that I've been thinking about the sexual apocalypse is thinking in terms of coming to terms with, or the integration or revelation of pathos, the id, and these repressed sexual aspects to how our social body operates and understands itself. I've been thinking about this particularly within the context of female sexuality, being a woman, but then also thinking about how little we really know, like how confusing and kind of mercurial the sexual aspects of women are, and that the distinction of female sexuality from male sexuality, and how we can kind of begin to study or ask questions about what it is for women to come to an awareness about their own bodies from a kind of logos perspective. How can we understand the pathos of the female body, and then also unity of those things? So understanding the kind of myriad ways in which sexuality plays itself out within community, or Hasbard would say within the tribe, and that not only being something that's operating on an unconscious level through kind of mimesis or through movement in the tribe between people, but is actually something that we can wield consciously and think about as a kind of energetic, maybe that's kind of a hippie term to use, but as a kind of power that moves between people and can actually be wielded to create some sort of like emergent structure, emergent energy or power within the group. And I think you could think of religion as actually having been a source of the discovery of how to wield those types of things among groups. So that's something that I've been thinking a lot about. But in general, even thinking about the Dark Renaissance as kind of being a period of time where we've had this revelation, or we're beginning to kind of see the light in some way. And instead of just thinking about it from a kind of analytical perspective that's stuck in abstractions and in the mind, we begin to interact and engage with material worlds, and to produce great art, to produce great myth that is rooted in the exploration of sex and pathos, and wielding it through materiality and through ritual and in groups together. So the Dark Renaissance, I think the use of the word dark is to indicate that there are very unpleasant things that we have to look at and unearth and engage with, and bring those things forth and out into the material that we use to express through mythos, with poetry and other forms of expression. So that's my understanding of those words.
And how do we put these two words, let's say, apocalypse and sexuality together? I'm interested more on that. Why is sexuality so incredibly revealing of, the word apocalypse is a disclosure or a revelation. Why is it so incredibly revealing of who we are, and why is it so dangerous, and why is it so dark, and why is it like maybe I could get you guys, maybe Cadell could speak on that, since you're a you work a lot with Freud and Jung and the psychoanalysts.
Sure. Well, I like the emphasis on the notion of apocalypse as kind of a disclosure of great knowledge, as opposed to, the more sort of common pop culture notion of apocalypse as like you get this image of some sort of destructive chaos where everything just falls apart or something like that. But actually it's kind of more like the traditional notion of apocalypse is kind of more like a revelation than a destruction of everything in some sort of,
well, it's
simplistic.
Both simultaneously.
Yeah, well, it's both simultaneously, exactly. Yeah. So the disclosure of great knowledge is both the destruction and the creation of something new. But why is it so dangerous? Why is it so dark? It's only so dangerous and only so dark from the perspective of the impotent ego image. That's the only reason it's dangerous and dark. The people, like the perception that it's dangerous and dark is coming from the egoic, impotent image and the censorship of the reality of what it is. Mm-hmm. It's like, to put it in neurobiological terms, like, and I want to get away from neurobiological terms, but just to put it in those terms first, it's like, if you look at the default mode network of the brain, there's the frontal lobe, and then there's this central system, which basically is the structure, the neurological structure of the ego. And these two structures are in their own dialectical opposition, because the abstract neocortex has a problem with the primal organizing functions of the base of the mind. So there is this way in which there's this active censorship, which is always going on for the intellect. I'm getting a weird sound.
I don't know who that's coming. Yeah. Okay.
So there's always this censorship which is going on from the frontal lobe of the brain and the back of the brain. And it's so weird too, because,
that's the taboo that Freud talks about, isn't it? I mean, in a way, that censorship. Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to put this in the contemporary neurobiological terms, just so that we can understand sort of the language that's being used in neuroscience, and sort of the way in which we need to transfer it basically into this universe of pathos, which was studied directly phenomenologically by Freud. So, just to sort of understand that we're not sort of against the scientific abstractions, but that they need deeper phenomenological engagement and embodiment. Like, and I want to, in that sense, I want to point to an important paradox that I see, and I have, I think, a unique relationship to it, because I studied at an institute which was constituted by these types of identities. So I've had a long time to observe them. All of them will repeat the ideological mantra of embodied consciousness. They all will repeat this mantra. But if you want to talk about, like, for example, what's it like to have a penis? What's it like to have a vagina? That's embodied consciousness. They do not have any time for that conversation. Or if you want to talk about the embodied consciousness of having a mixed sex research group, and having an attractive female in the group, or having an alpha male in the group, they don't want to have those conversations. So the thing is that they're only comfortable with engaging in an abstract text. That's what they're comfortable with. So, for example, you'll get like if you go to med school, right? You'll study the body, and you'll study the stomach, and you'll study the genital organs, but you get these weird paradoxes, for example, where like an obese doctor is telling you how to eat well, or a doctor who suffers from depression giving you antidepressant pills, and these paradoxes abound throughout all of the sciences. Where, like, my favorite joke in a Freudian book was something like two guys at a bar, and one guy's telling the other guy, my marriage counselor is getting a divorce. These types of self-referential paradoxes abound in the scientific literature because of this thing. Is because if you go to med school, you study the image of the genital organ, but you don't, for example, ask yourself the question, what's it like to have a penis over a 24-hour period? What's it like to be with the penis? What's that? Yeah. What's that like?
Yeah.
What's it like? What's it like to be a consciousness that got her period for the first time? What's that like? What's it like for that conscious experience? What does that do to my consciousness? How does my consciousness react to such a strange phenomenon? And what intellectual abstractions am I actively attached to, so that I don't have to be with that uncomfortable question? So I don't have to be with that uncomfortable experience. And the more this is delayed, meaning that the older the person becomes, the harder it is for them to approach these questions, the easier it will be for them to deflect displace, defend against this. So, I had the funny experience of like these two very disembodied, very intellectual men having conversations in my research institute. They can talk about anything, and except of course for these types of topics. And as soon as I intimate that maybe sexuality and the relationship between men and women is important to talk about all the things that are going on in our group, they'll quickly say, "No, I don't think that's not important. That's not important. That's definitely not important." Yeah. No, so the degree to which we can both familiarize ourselves with the contemporary scientific jargon, we know what we're talking about. We've read the cognitive science. We've read the biology. We know the abstract intellectual discourse. We can speak their language, but we're also deeply pathic, which means that we're also capable of speaking the real of what we are and how we interact. And the reaction that you'll get, and I think the reaction that we'll get in most environments, is a lot of blushing. Like they'll act like prudish Victorian women.
Yeah. So, because the mind-body split is so extreme, right? That's kind of what you're describing, right?
I love, because I'm so comfortable talking about it. I love the way I get some really interesting joy from doing it, is constantly injecting the pathic into the abstract intellectual space and seeing their look of shock and surprise. Like, oh my God. But I love it.
The funny thing is this. The funny thing is this, then, that 30% of the world's broadband is used for pornography. So these guys that blush when you talk to them, Cadell, probably go off and watch pornography and jerk off like mad for 2 minutes at least in the bathroom, and then they come back into the room again and pretend nothing happened. Like, they can disconnect between these two realities. And this is where I'm interested in pornography, to study it, because people are obsessed with it today, because this is where they get the release from this tension that Cadell is talking about here. And this brings me back to what we talked about the last time, and the sort of funny approach the last time that I love. I'd love to have a T-shirt that says, let's take queer back from woke, which I think is the overall project we're actually doing here in these conversations. It brings me back to Camille Paglia, who pointed out that no matter how mediocre mass culture or pop culture became after 1945 and all that, out of the 1960s came the hippies, because one of the benefits of having a period that actually believes in pacifism and vegetarianism and all this shit that I usually hate is the fact that you get experimentation in that zone while you're there. So the good thing that came out of the 1960s was the sexual liberation. For most cultures, it wasn't needed. In the West, it was definitely needed. And I actually think it's going to repeat itself even stronger in the Middle East, because I think we're going to see over the next few years where a lot of guys sit and jerk off in the Arab world and the girlfriends join them and watch pornography in Muslim countries, that the Islamic sort of response to the sexual liberation will be even more aggressive and interesting and fascinating. But I think the great thing here was the sexual liberation that came out of the 1960s, which goes back to the religious traditions that we have in the West, called Christianity and Islam, the two dominant ones, an approach to prudishness that Cadell talks about here, that we still see everywhere in society today, and basically exposes it and says that, okay, if sexuality is not included within religion, it's not religion at all. It's just an infantile fantasy. This was always the problem with Christianity, which has prohibited sex, period, and kept it out. The same thing with Islam, prohibited sex and kept it out. Whereas Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and certainly Eastern religions just kept it in a tantric zone, included in the religions, and somehow dealt with it. Now, even China and India copied the West and sort of pretended to be prudish. That's exactly when you come to India and people are prudish talking about sexuality, it's simply because something they've added since the Victorian England or something like that. It's like really on the surface, because India is also full of all these sex temples and yogas that walk naked, and sexuality is really very obvious in Indian society. So we need to bring sexuality back into the picture. That's one of the things we need to include when we rethink religion and spirituality. This is what I love about talk about the sexual apocalypse, because to me, the paradigm shift that's currently going on is out of our control, and it's strictly technological. We're leaving the industrial, capitalist, mass media controlled and driven age. We're moving into an informationalist age, It's attentionalist, not capitalist. And it dramatically changes everything. So it's a whole new game altogether. And those who figured that game out the first will be the winners. We talked about it before. It's called paradigmatics. Instead of having a model that's 50 or 100 years old or 500 years old in many countries, then why don't you get a model that's updated now and into the future? What kind of society do we live in? And what are the rules here? So to me, the world apocalypse here is the perfectly human response to the paradigm shift. And at least in the West, that is very much a sexual apocalypse, because what came out of the chaos at the end of the paradigm was the sexual liberation. That was the best thing we could have gotten, because it held us all responsible to the fact that when we entered the internet age and everything was accessible to everybody, including our children, suddenly pornography is the thing we jump onto and consume in huge amounts. And what is great with pornography, it is actually communism already.
I wonder if it's a kind of Protestantism. I was thinking.
No. Pornography. No, pornography is not Protestant at all.
You said it opens up like the Bard Absolute to everybody, right? So everything is available to everyone. There's no rules. I get the point, and it's a very intelligent point, but you're actually looking at the other way around. This is like, it's like everything opens up from underneath. It's much more the lesser. So what opens up, it's the grounding disappears. So if we had a religion that was based on the prohibition of sexuality, and this was the dominant mode of Christianity, hey, and we exposed that all these priests in the Catholic Church for 2,000 years were all a bunch of pedophiles, which is probably the biggest scandal ever, if at least you hold people responsible to the values they claim to have. I don't know if I would care less, to be honest about it. But, okay, so Christianity is falling apart. Whatever can be saved of it. Some people think they can. The Jordan Petersons and Thomas Hamericks of the world think they can. I doubt that seriously. I think Islam and Christianity are actually a supernova stage where they seem to explode into some kind of fundamentalist desperation, just like advertising right now. The supernova before they die. Why would they die? Because they no longer hold against the fact that we now know much more than we did in the past. The truth is revealed to us all from underneath. And the problem then is to deal with this truth means that we then have to construct Bard absolutes so we can deal with it. So people are, for very good reasons, desperate to get filters on their computers so the kids cannot watch endless amounts of violence and porn, which kids should not watch because they cannot handle it. It fucks them up forever. That's why Christian Republicans are right to go after Google right now, because they want their filters installed. They think their kids can watch this at their own free will at a certain age or something like that. But please, we got to get the pornography and the outright violence out of the hands of 4-year-olds, which is perfectly, yes, of course, we're human. The Bard absolute for a child is to not be a grown-up yet. And then for grown-ups, the question is, can they handle all the free sex, all the free drugs, all the free pornography? Probably not. But now the genie's out of the bottle. That is the sexual apocalypse. And the response to that, I think, is what we call the dark renaissance. It's an artistic response to that is not trying to cure us from anything. It's just a whole new, it's like a gold mine full of resources for art. When art gets out of the galleries of the white walls and goes into Burning Man and participatory culture and then finds that vulgar and banal and moves to the next stage, which is what I'm dying to see. This is the art of the 2030s and the 2040s. This is where they're going to go. They're going to go into violence and they're going to go into sex when all of this boom is exploding in front of us. Okay, sex and violence. I have a clarification about that, right? Because we've been talking about sex and violence and the point that our friend Tom was making is that violence, is the big issue of humanity, right? And sexuality is number two. And I was thinking about the story in the Genesis. It's the whole story begins with sexual jealousy in some way, and then after you have Cain and Abel, and after you have violence, and after you have war. So I'm wondering, if that's right. I'm wondering if the first thing is actually the dark aspect, and I want to question Cadell saying, "Oh no, it's no problem." I think it seems to be that sexuality is a problem when it's unleashed.
Okay, can I just make one pass here? if we assume Byung-Chul Han's statement is correct, that the amount of violence in any given society is a constant, the amount of sexuality and sex drive in any society is a constant, and if they ever vary, it's because one of them gets higher for a while and the other one gets lower. Mm-hmm. It's just an idea. Let's see if we can play with that, see what Cadell thinks of it. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Cadell and Raven, do you have anything coming up here?
Well, I don't know if I said sex is not a problem. I think I say the opposite.
Well, yeah, you said sex if it's filtered through the ego is if becomes problematic, but in itself it's not a problem. I think that's
No, I've never said that. I've never said that. Thomas says that. Thomas says sex is not a problem.
Sex and violence are always problematic. That's why we're
like Thomas thinks that we can solve sexuality. But I don't think it's like that's the application of an excessive linear model, like where you're thinking in problem solution all the time. Mm-hmm. You can't think about sexuality as problem solution. Kind of framing it as a problem or a solution is kind of already you're kind of making a mistake. I agree with this notion. Like, let me engage with Bard's notion that violence and sexuality are a constant. Because the way I think about this is with the term libidinal economy or libidinal politics, because the political economic dimension is what basically is, handling the violence and the violent tendencies of our society, and the libidinal is basically accepting that we the body politic is a libidinal body. So you're dealing with both. What Thomas and I talked about last night was kind of I think mostly a reconciliatory understanding that sex and violence are like a loop. And I think you have to start with sex. I think sex is first, and I think that sexuality then becomes a problem because it's so unequally distributed and the excitation is so enormous that you need some sort of regulatory scaffolding in order for it to make sense across time or as time.
And just being more practical, you can see most of violent, crimes are sexually related, right? On some level, totally to do with alcohol and sex, right?
So the problem is this. If you look at after 1945, and we sort of bought into this pacifist bubble because we had the luxury of the atomic bomb. To be honest about it, it wasn't that we became peaceful. It's just that the atomic bomb became, this ultimate threat that if we do go to war, if there's a third world war, we go extinct. So that was an idea long before the climate threat, appeared as a second threat, right? So that is clear after 1945. And then we went to this pacifist mode where a young narcissistic generation in the West in the 1960s and 1970s thought they solved all the problems of humanity and they do much better than the parents, and they became like high on themselves. And then Mao kidnapped that to China, and there was a cultural revolution and complete disaster. That's what happens. Young people think they're wise. They're never wise, right? But the problem here is that if you remove violence or you suppress it, it's going to pop up in two places. It's going to pop up as either an over-sexualization of everything else, which is exactly what we're seeing. And it's going to pop up inside your own brain, in your own mind, and it's going to be self, we call it auto-exploitation. That's the term Byung-Chul Han is using correctly. That means we're now suffering from massive psychiatric
depression,
because we don't know where violence has occurred. If violence is still around, it's now inside our own head. This is Michel Foucault, which brings us back to taking queer back from woke. The grandfather of queer is Michel Foucault. He's a fucking genius. And what Foucault pointed out was that he saw that if you don't deal with madness, and not the madness in the mental institutions, because that's not mad at all, this is shamanism, the madness of power itself, thinking that it's in control and in charge of things. If we don't start dealing with that, it's going to explode in our faces sooner or later, because what this power will do in its hysteria is that it will force the violence inside our own minds. And he pointed out Sweden, where I live, as the first country where this was likely to happen. And he said, you will not need policemen in the streets because the policeman will be inside of your fucking mind as your ultimate superego.
Yeah.
This is where Slavoj Žižek, Michel Foucault, all these guys agree strongly. Adrian Johnson, they agree strongly. Byung-Chul Han. The current critique of the state we're in the sexual apocalypse and the paradigm shift right now, is that we see massive psychiatric disorders. I know the male version of it. It's called bipolarity. It's a pandemic now. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear Raven's version, what's happening on the female side, because I'm sure the eating disorders and the burnouts at the 30s, 40s are exactly signals of this. But the obvious place to look for is not the over-sexualization, because we can't go back to more violence right now and have more war. It's rather look at the other way around. That to me is the sexualized spaces that we force men and women to be in constantly all the time. Because that is the one that starts these eating disorders and these bipolarity disorders and all that, is that men and women are together all the time, meaning women have to be dressed up, walk in high heels, and wear tons of makeup and do Botox all the time, 24 hours a day.
Yeah. So this extreme internalization of violence has become every kind of sexual pathology you can imagine, rather than having a more natural or well, that's
this is the sexual apocalypse. It's happening in our everyday lives. When you go to work on a Tuesday and you put on your makeup, your high-heeled shoes, or as a guy, you feel totally inferior because you're going to be in a room with women around, so you can't talk to men in a natural way because men can't. A beautiful woman like Raven enters the room and they go, wow, and they start to impress her, and you can't talk to them any longer. They're blinded by her beauty. Now, we've never had a culture like that before, ever. We never had a culture where men and women work together 24 hours a day. Who came up with that idea? Well, the hippies in the 1960s. That was the bad side of the sexual liberation that we can't deal with. It's deeply inhumane.
Okay, let's hear from Raven a little bit about women, and also I want Raven to, maybe we can make a bit of a segue into speaking about art, because I was listening to Raven speak about the body and mythopoetics and that kind of thing on the Techno-Social podcast, and I thought you had a lot of cool things to say about that as well. So just how you're digesting this, and then what do you think the function of art in the like sexual apocalypse, and and how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the bipolarity with men kind of as being this way of pointing to the effects of the sexual apocalypse within their sex.
Yeah.
I think with women, we're seeing a lot of different things. I mean, for teenage girls, for example, there's an increase in suicide, in
big increase,
self-mutilation. Like even 11-year-olds, like they literally didn't have any like statistics for this until very recently, and it's going up, right? And then we also have the kind of the mimetic contagion of trans. So there's also a lot of girls who are going through puberty and basically decide that they don't want to be a woman and they want to go through some sort of intervention process to prevent their secondary sex characteristics from emerging. And this is way beyond the normal amount of trans that we would imagine to see in this population. So kind of considering this as being connected to this apocalypse of women kind of coming into their bodies as teenagers. Then we're also seeing women, postpartum, having children. I think that this relates a lot to one of the things Bart was saying the other day about women are not being seduced into having children anymore. Instead, they're deciding to do other things. And basically waking up when they're 40 and realizing, oh my God, what have I done? And then going through intense fertility treatments so that they can have babies. And this is a huge industry. This is a massive industry that is continuing to grow. And it's really hitting this group of career women who are now in their 40s, who have finally realized that like, oh, this career is hollow and I want to have a child. And they have to intervene very intensively in their bodies in order to ensure that they can go through their first pregnancy, even conceive, and then actually bring the baby to term and make sure that it's healthy and actually viable. And then they only end up with one child. And that ends up causing the coddling, devouring mother situation with the baby. So you have these kind of like looping things going on within motherhood and within women kind of coming into their womanhood and not knowing how to wield that as a power, not knowing how to understand themselves as women among men, and knowing exactly what it is that a woman can bring to a, like, let's say, heterosocial environment. The fact that everyone's just pretending like women and men are essentially the same, and it's just that I have like a woman's suit on and you have a man's suit on, and we're just repressing all of these underlying tensions that exist between men and women in these environments, I think is like it's just absurd. I mean, it's just absurd on some level. It's like living in a delusion. And you would imagine that that would ricochet. So those are some symptoms or effects that I have seen. And your other question was about art. Does anyone want to respond to those things?
Yeah, I wanted to, we've talked a little bit, about, society and the social conditions right now. But I know that, often the way to express, Cadell was saying that we can't really speak about, a lot of guys can't, and people can't really speak about their dicks and pussies, and we can't talk about it. It's too, so we become very hyper abstract and in the mind and that kind of thing. And for me, the way to speak about pathos, right, is through art. And so also I think there has to be a feminine element to art always. Like there's always a dance between the male and the female when it comes to this creation of art, whether it's on some level, even if it, anyway, I just wanted to hear your views about that.
Sure. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there's definitely a tradition within art, a trope of the muse, of the female muse. Obviously, Camille Paglia does a lot of amazing work in just unearthing the kind of history of pornography in Western art, and like the creation of the idea of beauty around the female body, and also the construction of the androgen. I think you also have to bring in the androgen if you're going to talk about art.
Yeah.
Like I think that's actually one of the more primary figures even than man or woman, because you end up kind of in this repeating pattern where whether or not you're writing as a woman or a man or constructing art as a woman or a man, there tends to be this like creation of figures that end up synthesizing male and female characteristics, and those are the things that seem to capture the imagination, and at least that's what Camille Paglia kind of puts forward in her text. So I think that's actually goes back to this whole idea of like stealing queer from woke. Like what is this particular character, the one that goes between, and that actually being the necessary kind of archetype to be contemplating, because what is going on? Well, we have this strange tension going on between the sexes. There's a disembodiment on both sides. I think women are kind of expected or understood to already be embodied, so it seems like there shouldn't be any problem for them, and yet there is. And men are fumbling around trying to find the women to deliver to, and they can't find them, and the women don't know how to give reward, in a way that actually generates a better functioning community and society. And nobody knows how to take responsibility for their power, their sexual power, and their relation. And so we need the androgen to come in and kind of do this work between, rather than wanting for men and women to like want to aspire to be this character, but actually to learn from what this character can show them about the other. So I think that that's kind of what I would imagine seeing is this go-between character. And it's so weird because it's been literally brought into the culture with non-binary or like with trans, or like people are like, we want this character to synthesize these differences and to teach us how to live with sexual difference. And yet the way that it's been interpreted is just so literal, so much about like, well, I have to put on my man suit or I have to put on my woman suit. And misses the point entirely about how to live with tension and with sexual difference. But that may have its roots in individualism. And like what Barbara would say, Gnosticism, because
it's kind of literalism too, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than working with metaphor and sublimating things.
But we live in a society where if anybody sees anything, they think it's a fucking product that they're going to buy and become. So this is what happens at apocalypse. When the apocalypse happens, you call in the shamans. And just for once, you need the shamans. And this is why the word queer is so central. I agree completely with Alexa Vartman here, that we need to retake the word queer and get it off from woke. I hate it. The more I think about it, the more I hate that the word queer was stolen by the woke guys, because queer should now be heroic and not a victimhood cult at all. When we say woke, we mean you turn queer into victimhood cult, like poor old me, I'm a tranny or whatever, and I need all this tons of attention and tons of money to do my gender modification, whatever. No, that's not the point. You
Make it
call
heroic
in the
again,
shamans. You call in the shamans, and the shamans come in with the heroic. They're always in the heroic because they're totally experimental and wildly crazy, and they're risk-taking, and they don't care if they live or die. That's essentially what shamans are, and androgynous are compared to men and women because the androgynous here, the map is that the androgynous are between men and women, and the shamans are outside of the whole system. That's why shamans and androgynous are like cousins here that we need to talk about them. And Camille Paglia would agree. So the shamanoid and the androgynous together are called the queer. We call them queer from now on. We define them as queer people, okay? So what the queer do when the apocalypse happens, the only people who can see this are the queer. And they come in and say two things. The first thing they tell you is you're out of sync. You're out of sync with your own fucking social biology. You're inhumane to yourselves. Okay, the Second World War and the First World War killed 100 million, mostly men, okay? The earth was scorched and destroyed. You left it with a lot of women without men who don't know where to look, and their children, and there were no men around. So phallus was gone. Phallus was gone brutally after 1945. And then we tried to create it. We got the pseudo-phalluses from commercialism and capitalism thrown into the picture, the nuclear family. It took 10 years to tear that apart. That was just a ridiculous idea. Again, commercial products, commercial products. This is your lifestyle. It's just a product. Lifestyle magazines. My God. That's just horrible and boring, right? So what happened was that at least out of the 1960s and 1970s, we got that, okay, we cannot go back to the Christianity or the Islam for that matter that led us into the world wars that we have and lead us into new wars over again. We got to reinvent religion. We got to reinvent spirituality. And the first thing the shamans tell you is, listen, you're just regular human beings. You're regular men and women. Can you just be nice to yourself? Can you realize that when you're 15 years old, certain things happen to you? In your process, in your body. When you're 25, certain things happen to you. At 40, certain things happen to you. And by God, you live until you're 80 and 100 suddenly all of a sudden. That leaves maybe after 60 years old, a certain period for experimentation. But please don't do it before you hit the golf course, right? Because before that, until you leave the reproduction cycle, you are very, very much tied to your biology. This is where Camille Paglia and I agree strongly. You're tied to biology. And if you try to escape your biology, you're fucked up, and society gets fucked up very easily. And that's where we are now. It's all screwed. Women don't give birth any longer between 20 and 30. They try to give birth in fucking clinics when they're 45. Who came up with that idea? Gender, what? If you're gonna change your gender, it's a cosmetic procedure. Any good tranny knows that. You can fix the tits and everything, but inside of that, there's a tons of biology you cannot even change at all. You know, and that's why I honor them when they say they're a third gender. They should be allowed to be third gender because they're not moving from man to woman or back. These are forces we're not even close to understand or to try to direct in any way we like. So we need to get back to some kind of nature. And what I'm saying is that what the shamans then would say is that that's precisely why women are being attacked directly on the body. The current attack is on the female body, eating disorders, burnouts, everything. And as soon as a woman is older than 22, she's no longer sexually attracted. That's what she's told these days. She tries to stay 22 until she's what, 50, right? Hollywood wives and everything. Men attacked on their minds. Men feel mentally inferior everywhere you go. They feel they cannot live up to the sudden shamanic ideal they're supposed to live up to, being bright and experimental and risk-taking and everything. Well, they cannot be all Elon Musk. They cannot be all us or whatever. That's just cruel.
Let me jump in here because I have a few things to say. So it's kind of in response to both what Bard and Raven were saying, and I want to give my own perspective on what I see among the men and women of my generation. For the men, so Bard's saying the men are being attacked on their minds and women are being attacked on their bodies. And Raven's saying that, you know, men don't know how to deliver to women and women don't know how to give reward to men. So what I've seen is the men in my generations they're mentally ashamed of being men. They feel guilty that they're men. They won't frame it like that. They won't say that, but that's how they talk and that's how they act. I know some men who are very close to me who, for example, let me give a ridiculous example. This will make you guys laugh. I know so many men who are close to me where if I told them, if we were at a coffee shop and they saw a cute girl at the coffee shop and I said, why don't you go say hi? They would say, no, that would be toxic masculinity. So they're literally afraid. They literally see their own presence. They literally see their own self. They literally see their own speech as an a priori intrusion and an ontological mistake. They see themselves as wrong for being what they are. And then on the women's side, what I see is women modeling their power on a man's model, and they only can see their power from the perspective of a male dominance hierarchy. And they, at the same time, they're trying to, whatever it is, become a lawyer, become a professor, become a doctor, become a whatever it is they think is the where the power is. They're simultaneously doing endless amounts of cosmetic procedures on themselves to look 20. And this is operating in this contradiction in their heads simultaneously. And then for the men who are ashamed of being men, they basically are undergoing self-castration processes. And the consequences of this is just that we don't know how to have children. We don't know how to have long-term relationship. We don't know how to do any of these things. So it's a nightmare, and no one is talking about it. And I think that the interesting form of repression that you see here, because it's kind of a paradoxical notion of repression, because in both, especially it's present in Lacan, but repression also operates as a surface phenomenon, not just in the depths. It's also on the surface. So for example, what do we see in art with this repression? You see the most popular song in the United States in the last few weeks has been WAP, Wet Ass Pussy. The most popular song in the United States is Wet Ass Pussy. That is basically art forcing itself upon our minds to say, you have a wet ass pussy. You have a lot of power. That's where your power is. You've got to think about this, and at the same time, where is the repression on the male side? Look at there's a lot of articles now that in the last decade, hip hop has become the most dominant art form in the United States. It's overtaken rock. The phallus of rock has been replaced with the phallus of hip hop. And what is hip hop? Hip hop is this overly aggressive male energy. It's an overly aggressive tribal gang energy. So it's basically art is forcing itself onto the mind, saying, you are men and women. You have to think about being men and women. And if you don't think about it, we're just going to become more, we're going to force the aggression of the sexual difference on you even more and more and more until you talk about it and you grow up and you mature.
I'm not sure if I agree if it's overly aggressive, because I think art needs to be aggressive in some ways, and it needs to be a maximum of expression of something rather than something sort of refined. If you look at,
and just a sec, let me quickly say, because I know a lot about hip hop, is that if you take the paradigmatic figures of hip hop, they are extreme caricatures of masculinity. They're not like they're like, it's like the lyrics are like explicitly just about killing and fucking in a lot of the biggest hip hop artists, and especially the ones I grew up on. I mean, it was this extremely violent, extremely sexual music, which is extremely attractive.
Yeah. And then everybody's acting kind of soft, and at the same time, like there's a contradiction between the culture and that expression, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, that's why art is pathic. So this is the pathic narrative that comes back to haunt us when we're stuck between logos and mythos. My criticism of the contemporary sort of critique, for example, Jordan Peterson, is that it gets stuck between logos and mythos. The guys who've been stuck between logos and mythos have really nothing new to say. They become banal moralists to say, get up in the morning and make your bed and everything will be solved. No, it will not. They ignore pathos. That's why Jordan Peterson was much more interested in the beginning when he was doing his Nietzsche lectures in Toronto before he became a public figure and became sort of a banal logos versus mythos figure. I think we all defend pathos here. And we don't want Adolf Hitler's version of pathos. We don't want the sort of boy pharaoh's sort of vulgar Peter Pan or pillar saint version of pathos. What we want is the proper one. So this is why I talk about pornography. Cadell talks about hip hop. Okay, where does hip hop get its inspiration from? Pornography more than anything. And usually these days, what's ironic is that it's the white guys who make the careers in pornography and inspire the black guys to make the music. Because hip hop today is the soundtrack of pornography. That's why Camille Paglia was prophetic when she celebrated the pathical narrative 30 years ago and said it's going to come back to haunt us because it's going to look like a moving to this sort of Victorian age of prudishness and petit bourgeois nervousness, which is exactly what woke culture is. And then coming back from underneath, boom, and exploding from underneath of it will be pathical art. And pathical art is exactly where this goes. There's a lot of bland commercialized hip hop, Drake and whatever. That's what your mom listens to. But what Cadell is discussing here, what's number one right now in America, is precisely the opposite. And this is just a censored version available to the public, because the other version of it, and this is the thing with hip hop, is you can have the explicit lyrics version of it. It's exactly the soundtrack, the pornography that I'm talking about. This is why it's a sexual apocalypse. It's openly sexual. And next to it is also an apocalypse of violence. And that's going to be even harder to contain. And the only thing we got that we don't have this experience in the West at all. This is where Thomas Hammerich and I agree. And you and Andrew have talked about it too previously. We have no idea how to contain violence. The way you contain violence here in the West is basically martial arts at best and maybe a football stadium, and you think you somehow contain it. That's not enough. You need much bigger, stronger containers.
You need religion.
Contain it at all. Otherwise, we're going to have religion wars between Christians and Islam and Muslims as the last sort of super phenomena, like when Christianity and Islam are dying and the Middle East is secularized or whatever. The last thing that's going to happen is sort of a pagan thing coming up from underneath within Christianity and Islam, because they're weak religions. It will explode through both of them. We could have religious wars because of it. Pseudo wars, it doesn't matter. The 30 Years' War in Europe that tore Europe apart and killed 30 million people was a pseudo war too. Wars, unfortunately, don't have much of intelligence to them. They don't listen to theories before they go to war. They just go to war to have an expression for desire and suppression of violence that needs to get out somewhere. And
okay.
either
what do we do?
Total over-sexualization, or somehow we need to contain the violence and let it out somewhere. And this is also female and masculine. The masculine version is open aggression. The female version is where woke comes up today. It's passive aggression, which is exactly what woke culture is. It's female passive aggression, bitterness all the time.
So what the fuck do we do with all this aggression? I mean, I have a lot of aggression just sitting in front of a Zoom camera all day long. It just comes out and I feel like attacking somebody. But I'm living in a civilized society.
How old are you, Andrew?
I'm almost 50, yeah.
If you have that at 50, can you imagine what it's like to be 23-year-old today? Do you know what the 23-year-olds do? They either are openly aggressive or tell them to go to martial arts and learn to hunt, because I live in Sweden, which is the Canada of Europe. Go out in nature and hunt and shoot stuff and kill things because you need to get some outlet. But if you're 23 and you're calm and quiet and you're a guy, you hate yourself. You hate yourself. That's where the violence ends up. Inside here, attacking you constantly. We cannot ignore these forces. That's why we need to go back to Foucault and then Paglia and teach fucking Paglia she was wrong about Foucault. She's fucking Foucault's daughter. The line from Foucault to Paglia is the only thing we have towards what I would call the Western Tantra.
Boy, did she ever hate Foucault.
Yeah, she's wrong on Foucault. She's his daughter. That's her only mistake. It's not to see where she came from.
Okay, so in male aggression, we go. I keep bringing it back to Raven because guys tend to express their male aggression through shouting on Zoom these days. So if the solution for that is like go out in nature and hunt and do really physical things, how do we help women? Like with this internal aggression, with this Instagram culture, which is causing such an enormous amount of pain and, huge suicide rates going up like this for women, especially. Like, what do we do with that? Like, what's the solution? That, again, we're still talking about the sexual apocalypse here, I think. But what is a solution, or what solutions? I don't like the word solution, but how can we help women with this sexual apocalypse that we're talking of?
Yeah, well, I think maybe a way of getting at like that rejection of the idea of solution. This is so much more about like wielding like a power or an energy or a force, right? And it's like, just like having long-term relationships is a skill set, just like having the ability to bring forth children and bring in the future is a set of skills. Like, you could literally spend your entire life perfecting your capacity to do all of the things that women traditionally would have been doing, right? Like, raising children is a huge undertaking. Understanding how birth works and how to lead women through the process of pregnancy and birth is huge. Figuring out who should marry whom, what families should be unifying their power and their lineages together. Like, all of that is like an insane amount of wisdom that I think women have in the matriarchy. That was just something that women were doing.
Can I make one just little interjection here? I remember Ivan Illich saying that women have the power of gossip, and that's a sacred power, actually. And like, we normally think of that always as a negative kind of thing. So anyway. Yeah, no,
gossips actually is very interesting, because I think that is this force that kind of like spreads through the intergenerational relationships between women and keeps them kind of in check, and keeps their eyes kind of in all of the different crevices of relationships that are happening within the group. And it kind of keeps everybody held, up in this like position of tension. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a complex situation, because on some level, I don't know what women should do en masse, like, in order to learn how to wield their power. I think for some women, they're actually reaching to pornography. They're actually opening up an OnlyFans. They're actually beginning to produce, content online. And I think a lot of that is just an exploration of female sexuality in this vein of how we've been speaking about it, which is like giving of the reward. Right. So women love to expose themselves, like to expose their breasts, to expose their butt, to expose these like beautiful parts of their bodies for men, for some sort of abstract audience. I mean, they're not even seeing the men. Like, it's just a like, but I think the act, and there's a huge amount of like, like titty drop at work, or like all these transgressive, places where women want to reveal their bodies to some sort of audience, and withdrawn voyeur who she knows is watching her. So there's all of this like ways in which I think women are actually trying to kind of figure out their sexuality, figure out what gets them turned on, what gets them inside of their bodies, and also generating a kind of power around that. But it has been basically quartered off in our society to pornography and to the public. So this is also about public exposure. So that's an interesting trend to me. It's also definitely increasing, like, especially with the pandemic, like so many more women are now on OnlyFans. So what does that mean? What does that mean that, like, first of all, women are now whoring themselves just at work, that we're just like all whores, like everybody's a prostitute, everybody's going to work, everybody's selling themselves for money. So now we just have women who are like going directly to the source, which is basically just selling sex for money. And, what does that phenomenon do, I think, in terms of its tension with motherhood and also with stigma around women being prostitutes? So there are issues with women who have done porn or been involved in this like emerging culture, finding men that want to be with them and want to have, because there's mom's got porn on the internet, like people don't want to do that. People don't want to date a porn star. And so there's like interesting historical precedent for this as well. Like the prostitutes were able to walk into the world of men and engage with the men, hang out with them. They were like respected and understood as having this special power. Maybe we would also consider them to be kind of shaman or queer in that sense.
Yeah, like the geishas
Exactly. And the moms, like, they were at home. Like, they weren't allowed to come to hang out with the men, and like, you know, the men would sit around talk about politics or whatever, and the prostitutes would be around and they would get to engage, you know, in that world. But there was this division, right? So the prostitutes had their role and the mothers had their role, and the men were interacting with these two different kinds of people. And I think that now all of this stuff is getting, like, women are getting into pornography, but they also want to have babies, or they want to have normal relationships. And yet men are not, you know, they don't know how to deal with this, like, because men are like, you know, they're like, well, but wait, you're not supposed to be there, you're supposed to be there. And like, how do I deal with the fact that these things have been conflated? So, and I think this actually is a meta point in terms of women being these, like, kind of more classically mercurial people who have all of these, like, blending characteristics to how they shape and form their identities. And we can kind of move between roles, and there's a singularity in the role of the woman as the sister, as the daughter, as the mother, you know, as the lover, you know, all of these things kind of coming together in the form of the woman, and her ability to kind of emphasize and relate to others in a myriad of ways. And of course, with the sexual revolution, we see these roles becoming even more centralized, right? Like, and Paglia talks about this all the time in Sexual Personae, the incest of romanticism. You end up with these woman sister lovers, and you know, you're like, okay, so in your head, like, why is this darkness emerging, where we see this return to this kind of regressive state where people want to unify, like men and women want to unify as these, like, twins in the womb. And so I don't know, that was all just like a mapping of the situation.
I have just one comment is that it seems that you gave me some insight into why traditionalism is coming back, right? Because the sexual apocalypse is this extreme fragmentation of roles and everything kind of falling apart in that sense. And then people are going to be desperately searching for new for the, you know, the primordial roles or the archetypal roles.
But wait. It's not. We don't have a tradition like that at all. We just have Christianity and 2,000 years of Christianity. We don't have a tradition to refer to, unless you go 10,000 years back. What I love about Ray's presentation, this gives me great hope. Exactly what women should do post Instagram. Exactly what she's talking about. Maybe she's talking about shamanic women who do it already and they're sort of ahead of the curve. This is what women should do. Why? Okay. Say you work as a psychoanalyst in a psychiatric care unit. So I work with psychiatry, although I'm a psychoanalyst. That means somebody comes in through the door in the early 20s and they're in a crisis. The number one thing to think about if he's a young man is you probably want to send him out into nature, because he's supposed to be nature and culture. So you want to send him out into nature. So he's grounded somewhere. So you give him, you know, some pins, and here's a tent, and an older man, preferably of his own archetype. Somebody similar to him who's just older and has succeeded in life, and say, you're going to cross a mountain, be out in nature, and learn how to hunt and become a man that way. That's what you do. And if he's grounded in that, he might even move to the countryside and become rural, because men are essentially rural, but women are not. If you look at tribal structures and how women live, the square at the center of the village is completely female. It's a matriarchy, right? This is where gossip comes into the picture. I use the word intrigue instead because I think it's sexier. Intrigue is just a smaller, tighter strategy. Strategy is just intrigue with testosterone. Men think strategy. That's why straight guy is lost inside intrigue. The gay guys and the women will just pull him down and kill him. He won't survive in that environment. Straight guys cannot handle intrigue and gossip. So the urban environment today is exactly gossipy and intrigue-ish. So it's perfect for women. That means if I get a young woman who's in the early 20s, the good news I can give her, if you survived your teenage years, considering all the pressure you get from other girls your own age in the teenage years, you're okay. What? Yeah, you're okay. We're just going to avoid you being burned out when you're 35. So the first lesson I give the girl is that I introduce her to a gay guy and a woman. And I take her out and I said, I'll leave her with that. I'd say the gay guy and the woman are your best friends. They're going to take you out to a bar on a Friday night and teach you how to drink a glass of white wine and go along with the gossip and write on it. Because otherwise you won't survive. You will not be a girl that the matriarch will appoint to be fucked at the ritual or anything. You'll be outside of the system. So I think what Raven is describing here is incredibly interesting, because if women are discovering that Instagram was just this empty asshole of just cats and baby pictures, and at the end of the day, it was just time pass. Like the guys discovered the computer games, which is the loneliest thing they ever did, and the ultimate cruelty towards manhood. The women are discovering that Instagram was where they were trapped in something that meant nothing. Mediocre cat and baby pictures, nothing else. Horrible. 8 hours a day. Get out. So women then have to redefine it. So sit down at the table with other women, take the glass of white wine, and there are 10 women and a couple of gay guys, just like we have the lesbians with us, we go hunting. And that environment, which is female androgynous, therefore creative, will then create the possibility of women to start experimenting with their female energy. And they got two great assets, two enormous assets. They're the Saudi Arabians of sexuality, because men die to be close to them, even if they don't even get to fuck them, just to talk to them. And they're sitting on the reproduction cycle, meaning that men don't have a heritage and no future unless they have babies with these women. That means women ultimately have the ultimate power here. And if women start realizing that and start to play around with that and slowly, gradually go back to the social biology and be nice to themselves and say, yeah, I am both the madam and the whore at the same time, no Madonnas here. Madam whore at the same time. I'm the wife and the lover at the same time. I can play with these things. And I can find maybe another sister who's older than me, and she could be the wife, and I could be the lover, and we can together go to the man and say, we're going to take all your money and all your resources and everything, and you're going to give it to us, and we'll give you a tiny baby that will inherit your empire. You know, that is the beauty of female power. It could be there.
Yeah.
It could potentially be there.
There's something kind of repulsive about a lot of men being involved in intrigue and gossip. Whereas it seems to be what you're saying, it's the realm of the androgyne and the woman, and that kind of makes sense to me. Honestly.
I love intrigue and gossip, and I always defend it. This is why I'm very strict about saying I neutrally use the terms intrigue and strategy.
Strategy, yeah.
Okay, strategy is just intrigue, blown up, where the nodes are further away from each other, and straight men can think that way, and lesbians can understand it. That's why strategy is what you do at warfare, it is what you do at hunting. That means men need to be within that realm. That means martial arts and a football stadium. Everywhere you find tons of men who get the game
strategy.
And win, it's strategy. When the men are fascinated with the chieftain, they watch a porn star or a hip hop star bragging about his dick. When they're fascinated with the priest, they go to see these games. And it's not the two combatants they're actually looking at the martial arts game. They're looking at the referee. The referee is the priest. And how he controls the strategy is what men get fascinated with. That is masculinity. Masculinity, how to contain your masculine energy within a game that is called war or hunting. Fundamentally masculine.
So men do strategy and women do intrigue.
Yes, and women do that beautifully. And that's why I warn guys. Listen, guys, if you live alone as a young man today in a big city, you're a loser right there. Get a couple of friends and live with some others until you find the right woman and marry her and maybe move out into the suburbs. It's the men who want to get out into the suburbs where they can get a property and hopefully have a woman inside the property who wants to stay there for a few years and have children with her. That's the male sexual fantasy. The ultimate fantasy is that property and a woman and they're in the house and there are trees around, it's savannah, and you have a neighbor and you go out with him and you go to the football game with him. That's a male fantasy. That's why men want to get out into the suburbs, a very masculine world, because the modern urban world is a gay man's and a girl's world. And it's a world where straight men are completely fucked up. They don't get it. Study Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, all these guys who did great pathical drama did this.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good to me. Do you have any thing to nuance, Cadell, on Alexander's point, or any nuances you want to add to that, or agreements or disagreements?
Well, yeah, there's a lot to comment on. I think what I want to focus on is something both Bard and Raven are talking about, which is basically the Madonna-Whore complex. This was like, it's been known for a long time. It was sort of recognized by Freud as this sort of weird complex structure that operates in men's minds and also women's minds, but obviously in different ways. And we have to learn how, to live with to live with tension, to live with paradox, to live outside of this problem solution way of thinking is to hold both at the same time. You're both at the same time. Women can be whores and Madonnas, or whores and mothers, if you want to use those words, at the exact same time. And I think that one of the crucial revolutionary sort of modes of thinking that I think I want to, well, I'm calling it that I want to introduce here is that to really think through the pathic the way we are is the necessary precondition to actually think communist theory. We need to think a communist theory which is embedded in the pathic. It's one of the reasons why there are so many theorists who try to become Freudo-Marxists, because you want to combine the sexual pathic energy with the communitarian thinking, because you can't actually build a community unless you're thinking in a pathic way, because you build community with pathic energy and its various sublimations. And I think that one of the things that you get with pathic thinking is the ability to hold paradox, because it's just a constant with no, it's exactly like what Raven's saying when you're saying it's a power you wield more than a problem you solve. And that's one of the key elements. And I think that one of the sort of symptoms of our inability to do this are things like OnlyFans, but also don't forget like the epidemic of sugar babies. There's an epidemic of sugar babies. 30% of university women in Canada and Australia are becoming sugar babies. Where they're I'm Bard, that's perfect for Bard. You get like the 60-year-old, you get the 60-year-old guy with $1 million. He can just line up the sugar babies, right? Like it's just like right? So that's great. But like, you know, these are these are examples of the repressed symptoms on the surface, because you can't get rid of the pathic energy. If you don't pay attention to it, it will emerge in these very strange explosions of absurdity. And the absurdity will just keep on popping out at you in strange ways, whether it's in the music, whether it's the pornography, whether it's in the online media, whether it's in the Instagram, whether it's in the wherever it is. It's going to just be it's going to be omnipresent to the point where you can't help but talk about it, because you have to. And I don't know what the solution is for the straight guy other than to form brotherhoods. And I think like this is why it leads me to the steps towards communism, or a type of communist way, is women need to be in a network with women. Men need to be in a network with men, and we need to have, which is basically the desexualized spaces movement. And then you need to have, like Bart says, these go-betweens. And, you know, the funny thing for me in my life is my best friend is a lesbian woman who's kind of like my closest guy friend. You know, so like it's so natural for me to it was so natural for me to sort of have this. I already have this go-between. You know, it was just sort of naturally happened. My best friend is a lesbian who's kind of like a guy. And that happened where? That happened in the most urban city in Canada. So it was, you know, and I think, and the weird thing also is like my sister and like a lot of girls I know, they're dying to have a gay guy friend. Oh, yeah. They love having gay guy friends. There's nothing a woman loves more than having a gay guy friend. I think that straight men, I would like, my plight is more for the straight men, is that the straight men need to know.
Can I just add one thing here to save Foucault? Foucault pointed out in his last interview in 1982 where he refused to become gay. And he said gay's a big mistake because he did not believe in the American fantasy of the gay ghetto.
Yeah.
You're pointing out exactly that right now. I just want to point. Yes.
Yeah. So I agree. Yeah. So I think that I've got a gay guy friend who would agree with that deeply. But I just want to end by saying what I think is a really underutilized phenomena for straight guys in the urban city is the lesbian masculine figure. And I think that the reason why it's underutilized is because the lesbians don't go out enough. Like one of the problems in Toronto is that the gay district is dominated by the gay guys. There's no shortage of gay guys and gay nightclubs and gay all that. But the lesbians, they had one bar. And it was empty. Is that like they have this?
They're going to be in the military, or they're going to be in.
I think
no.
I think the lesbians need to make alliances with the straight guys
in the academic
Yeah,
world.
they do that. The lesbians were the ones who started leaving the cities long before the corona happened. Lesbians already live in the countryside as happy couples, isolated from the rest of humanity, and they don't care shit.
You're describing my mother.
They don't care shit about the trap that Instagram straight women and gay guys and straight guys are stuck within the city. They left. Okay, I live in a lesbian relationship. I'm a lesbian with a built-in dildo. My girlfriend is a lesbian. She loves me for it, right? So she moved to Tornedalen, which is like east of Lapland, the north. And she just isolated herself. She writes books and does anthropology. She just knew urban was over. She knew it. Like the sort of masculine energy in her just knew that before men realized this, I'm going to get out because I'm a woman and I get out. That's what lesbians and gay guys really run the hospices of the world. So any of these meeting spots, any of these places you find along the trade routes where people meet are run by gay guys, especially by lesbians. And what I want to point out, though, to go back, I agree with everything you said, Cadell. But what I want to point out, though, is that I think the dichotomy here between the Madonna and the whore that Freud points out is because Freud hasn't gone deep enough. Because when we constantly return to dichotomy, it's not necessarily that it's a dialectical, fruitful, creative. It might just be two different people we are talking about. And this one I bring in a matriarch that I studied deeply when I started studying matriarchy, brothel madams. Margaret Thatcher was a fucking brothel madam. She tried to save the empire before it fell apart. She was Churchill's daughter. And if Churchill won the Second World War, bless him, because he was brave enough to do it, then she just defended the Falkland Islands just to remind the British that Churchill had done that before her 30 years prior to it. So the matriarchs here, the brothel madam here, the brothel madam is the third person. Like always when you talk about woman and man and nuclear family and marriage and weddings, I say, well, why do a man and a woman go to see a priest in the first place to get married? Because there needs to be a third element to unite them. It's the same thing with the Madonna and whore complex. We cannot even discuss the Madonna-Whore duality that men project onto women before we start talking about different women, the matriarch. So you learn this historically when you go with your father to the whorehouse and your father generously offers his favorite whore to you and she smiles at you and she's 40 years old because your dad is 50 and you get to fuck a 40-year-old woman and you're 18. But that's what you do. If you're historically speaking, you go to the matriarch first. She's the brothel madam and she allows your tiny little teenage penis to sling, get inside her vagina and she loves you for it because you get to fuck. You get to fuck your mom, you get to fuck the older woman. And she enjoys it, by the way. That's exactly why women get a massive peak in the sexuality between 40 and 45, because they're supposed to fuck young men. And they do on Tinder these days. The great thing about Tinder is expose these pathical drives. Tinder's main mark is 25-year-old guys fucking 40-year-old women. Bless them. I love it. I think it's great because that's how you discover your male sexuality. It's non-reproductive. You learn how to trust your dick. Then you go with your brothers out there in the wilderness for 5 or 10 years to support your gang because you will not be ready to fuck a proper woman. The Madonna-Whore complex, the Madonna. You will not be able to fuck the Madonna until you've delivered an abundance. You got to deliver way more than you need. You got to put 10 times more. This is hip hop again. You got to put 10 times more dollars on the table than you ever need for the woman to be turned on by you. And that's when you should use the Madonna.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes left before I'm going to open up the Q&A. And I think that this information should be taught in every school. And exactly the way you do it, definitely, but it won't be. Too bad.
Alexander, you're muted.
I'm muted. Alexander, you're muted. So are you,
You can
Cadell.
only teach this after you've done your rite of passage. That means you can only teach this to people who have a grown-up penis and a vagina that's juicy.
Indeed.
You cannot teach it to children. That's exactly why his nature has kindly left us with about 5 years between you mature and your penis grows and your vagina gets juicy. That's like 12, 13 years old. And the rite of passage in any culture is between 18 and 19. And we have those 5 years to teach them what this means, that you have a penis there, or what this means you have a vagina there, what it feels like that, and what this leads to.
I wanted to, I don't know, Andrew, if you have a question, but I wanted
No,
to
no,
respond.
I was hoping you would chime in. 'cause I
Okay.
wanted to hear from you.
Okay. Well, I think that it was, Cadell brought up the sugar baby thing, which I think is like the other, I didn't mention that when I talked about kind of.
Sorry, I don't know what that is. Can you guys explain to me what that is? Because...
Sure. So sugar baby is like, it came out of this website called Seeking Arrangements, which is basically a dating service where men and women, usually rich men, court and offer kind of arrangements to women who put profiles on there about what kinds of basically men they want to date, what kind of things they want to be given. Like it's brilliant in this sense. Like I think that something about Seeking Arrangements really is like gets at the reality principle of the relationships between men and women and allows for women and men to interact with a kind of contract. So if you are a woman and you put a profile up, you say like, oh, I'm a student, I'm studying anthropology, I have to pay for my housing and I have to pay for my student loans and I like to go out sometimes and I would love to go on trips and I want you to pay for that. And I will go and we'll hang out together and I will be your sugar baby. And you'll buy me nice things.
Expression, reality,
you know?
Principle. I love that.
Well, it is in that beautiful place between whoring and like being a girlfriend. You know, it's like it and it really just gets at this like groove between men and women, where there is this like principle of arrangement that men and women have kind of figured out historically. And right now, because of the ambiguity and essentially a kind of lack of commitment, people are too busy, people have lots of stuff going on, and now women have their own ambitions. Like they want to get their degree, they want to pay off their student loans, they want to go build a business, they want to go see themselves be kind of phallic in the world. And a lot of these women, they're so pragmatic. They don't give a fuck about the fact that they're like whoring themselves. They're like, why do I care about that? I get to hang out with this like man who likes my affection, brings me things, takes me on these trips and adventures, appreciates the fact that I'm a woman and that I'm beautiful and that I'm intelligent. I mean, a lot of these women are women who are going to college. They're getting degrees. They're interested in developing themselves. And the other thing about these relationships is they also tend to have mentor-mentee dynamics as well. So it tends to be an older man who has like, but maybe a lot of them are in finance. A lot of them have very good connections to different kinds of people. So it's very pragmatic kind of choice to make, especially if you're a woman who's looking to climb the social ladder, which of course women are. Any ambitious woman who wants to be like a powerful matriarch is looking to climb the social ladder. And she's just using the tools around her to do that. And I think the thing about the sugar baby thing is I think it's like the most kind of like real, pragmatic experiment in this like all of the possible routes that this exploration of the dynamics between men and women can go, and the female sexuality, the relationship to the Madonna-Whore complex. Because I think the other thing is that women, and I can speak for this myself, something about the prostitute that is so alluring as a role. It's not something that is necessarily like repulsive. It's confusing. It's confusing because it's cast in this light, which makes sense within the context of a traditional society. You know, you don't want your women to become prostitutes, you want them to become mothers. And so you stigmatize prostitution, you stigmatize that kind of sexual relationship with men because you need a critical mass of women having babies or else you don't get the future. And you don't get children who are getting the kind of investment that they need within the family structure. But I think that women still kind of like, look at this thing and they're like, this is really interesting. What is going on there? What is this? What is this gaze? Like, what is this power? And there's been a divergence, you know, in history. You're either a Madonna or a whore and you can't go between. But the sugar baby thing is right in the middle. It's right in the middle. And so I think that that's a fascinating place to kind of study where people are being so fucking real about these relationships and dynamics between men and women. And they're just like letting them happen. And what comes of that? I mean, I think the way that you represented it as an epidemic, I think it is an epidemic and has some kind of weird, maybe implications for society in the sense that, you know, maybe people aren't actually getting married and having babies out of these things. But I also think that it's very interesting, especially within the complex of like the OnlyFans versus women who are like denying their femininity, dressing up as men, pretending they're men, and never having sex again.
I think this happened because of cultural reasons, because I don't think a meritocracy is worth it being called a meritocracy until the prostitute can become the queen. Okay? That is possible in Russia and Brazil. Perfectly possible. That's what I love about Russia and Brazil. These are cultures where a prostitute who's beautiful and smart and clever, because it's survival cultures. And if you got a survival culture, then you could admire a woman for using her best assets at any given time. This is radical pragmatism. I'm teaching guys all the time that the male mind is stuck with ideals, but the female mind never is. To learn to know a woman is to learn radical pragmatism. This is what we mean when we say that women are nature and nature, whereas men are nature and culture. It's radical pragmatism that brings women there. Okay. And what's interesting here, what exposed this, and I think kickstarted it, but people don't even know it, was Melania Trump. Because Melania Trump is Slavic, comes from Croatia, married a guy who's had his best days, but he was funny and quirky, and he delivered both fame and money, means he both delivered capitalism and potentialism. She married him, and she got a bunch of gay guys to make her look her best at any time for 4 years. Okay, she's probably tired of it. She's probably retired now. But Melania Trump brought something incredibly important to Western culture, to Europe and America, with its snobbish attitude against prostitutes. I'm sure Camille Paglia is going to write a love piece eventually towards Melania Trump, because she didn't even know this. She had no idea that America and Western Europe would sort of stigmatize the prostitute, because ugly women got to the forefront of radical feminism. The beautiful women sort of stepped away, like Camille Paglia says. It's just like the gay movement. When the ugly guys took over, they destroyed it. When the beautiful gays who died from AIDS disappeared, the ugly guys took over. That's the problem with the LGBT movement. And we need to restore it to putting the great looking, fantastic, smart gay guy at the front of it, or the gay, smart, shamanoid tranny at the top of it, and be heroic again. And the same thing goes with feminism. And I think Melania Trump therefore disturbs radical feminism and woke culture enormously. This is why they went after Donald Trump so heavily. They really went after Melania, because Melania is the ultimate sugar baby. She was in the White House as a sugar baby. She wasn't Michelle Obama who tried to overdress herself to look decently, nice and be smart and all that, be the college girl. But Melania Trump was exactly all these things. And she's incredibly powerful in presence. And this is what I tell the guys when they project idealism onto women and they go into the Madonna-Whore dichotomy. And I said, no, don't believe the Madonna-Whore dichotomy. It's culturally specific. It's not universal. That's why you can get around it. You can understand that during her lifetime, a woman will go through certain things, and she's very pragmatic. And for all the right reasons, within her sort of intrigue-driven world, she will maximize her opportunities. And she should. And that is where these young women come into the picture. I think bringing oligarchs and beautiful wives to the West is the best thing we could do right now. I think it's incredibly liberating, and it exposes the hypocrisies of the current American, Western European sort of where it's stuck. Okay.
So Raven looked just completely wrapped by what you were saying, and
I mean,
Cadell is like he's like a stone wall. I don't know what Cadell's thinking. So
Cadell,
we have
what are you thinking?
3 minutes left before I'm going to open it up. So I want to hear what the stone wall has to say. That's not a reference to Stonewall, but anyway.
I think it's incredibly interesting the way in which both Bart and Raven are expressing their views on the sugar baby phenomena, because it's kind of like taking the contradiction by the balls, so to speak, and just running with it, like just sort of accepting it, because there's like that sort of moralizing aspect of the idealistic man's mind, that it is in the man's mind and projected onto the woman, this moral ideal. Which does pathologize a lot of men, which is kind of like it freezes you because you reach the contradiction of, like, say, for example, the Madonna-Whore, or like the sugar baby, or someone like Melania Trump, and you're like, I don't know what to do with this, or I don't know how to move forward with this. You become frozen and almost, I think ultimately you become haunted by your own superego in some sense. But this is, I think, where we do need the androgynous figure to sort of just accept the contradiction. Just accept it. It's both. It's both. And you know, I think that, you know, it is what it is. We just have to accept it to love what we are. If we don't love what we are, then we're just going to spend our lives hating ourselves. I've had that experience already. I've had the experience of hating myself. I just want to accept myself. I got to accept myself, you know, and ride with it, or else I'll just go insane.
That's what I meant with internalized violence.
Yeah, but that's what happens.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Cadell. It's beautiful.
I mean, it
And
happens,
I think Raven and I are basically seducing you right now. So,
I'm willing to be. I'm totally
You're hot like hell. You're hot.
Let me tell you something though about my psyche, because I am on the more masculine end of things, and like technically I mean that, because if I think about something big and hard entering me, that would destroy my identity. I'm literally technically on the masculine side of things, and what I'm unconsciously doing to myself is setting up the social space where I can be released from my own pathological neuroses. And in order to do that, I need the tribe of the woman and the androgynous figure. I need to be taken by that. And then after that's happened, then I can be a man without this being frozen by the reality of my own body, not knowing what to do with myself.
I think that's absolutely fantastic, Cadell. I feel the exact same way as you, in fact. And I'd like to now open up.
Wait. Before you do the questions, let me just fill in one thing there. We created the Cartesian Kantian universe. You know how critical I is of this idea of individualism. I think it's the most stupid religion ever, right? That's the West, essentially. And atomism eventually became the norm. I live in Sweden. This is a country where 70% of households are single households. So it's a very interesting social experiment. Now, how do you think wins if you got a society where women live alone and men live alone? Women beat the shit out of men. What the women do, because it's the tribal map the women got, is that they live in the city, they got 2-room apartment and a dog. And they date any guy they want, and they date the hot guys on Tinder that come straight out of the forest and are hunky and big dicks or whatever. And then they straight the gay, you know, the guy with all the money and twice their age, and they play Russian oligarchs and sugar babies, right? This is what they do because they think, this is mental, they think of their home as the entire neighborhood. They think of the bars and the cafes and the shops and everything there as theirs. These shops and things are full of women and gay guys. They shoe shops, they're cafes, the restaurants at night. And they're perfectly happy to live in this environment. As long as they got a job to go to during the daytime, they're happy. What do men do who live on their own in urban environments anywhere in the world? They lock themselves off in an apartment at night, jerk off to pornography, play computer games, and hate themselves. Yeah. So I teach these guys, you cannot, because you think that small apartment is your home. It's not. You got to live with other brothers to begin to break out of that loneliness because you can't handle it. You can't handle it. The military service or monks in monasteries or anything, just look at any model of men live together. It's men who need other men to, you know, basically it's a game here. The women are fine on their own with their friends and the gay guys because they live like that. So there's a match here in the sort of modern urban environment that straight guys need to be aware of. And Cadell addresses it, he personifies it, but it's also a lifestyle thing. It's also a thing of, you know, Monday to Friday every week.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for preaching the gospel. All right. I'm going to open up the gallery here. So there's a bunch of people here, and if you would be kind enough, it would be great if you could show your faces, if you could turn on your cameras. You can unmute yourself now, according to my my Zoom. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. I would really like to bring in Thomas Halmerick first, because we've been talking about him a little bit at the beginning. And also because he's a regular here and always has good questions. I haven't been able to follow the chat very well because I've been involved in the conversation, and usually there's two of us. So I'll try to get to the chat, but I'm gonna say the people who are here and want to ask a question, if they could jump in. Thomas, are you with us? Maybe Thomas is off smoking a joint or something.
He says he has no questions. So why don't anyone who's asked a question, why don't you just unmute yourself and ask a question?
Exactly. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a question is, what do you think this term, because we've seen a lot of things kind of conflate. One thing is that one thing that's been a trend throughout a lot of literature is the idea of femininity being associated with technology. I mean, you go back to the oldest computers and how Sadie Plant describes in her book how those were kind of a feminine creation. Of course, now we see this whole idea of people really this whole transhumanist fad thing, but also people really merging with machines in terms of the way that you spoke of I think when you spoke of social media or something as like a feminine medium. So, I mean, how do all these things relate to these changes?
Okay, I don't know a single woman who wants to fuck a transhumanist. Not a single one. That's why they would die out, because they're so fucking boring. They're like 11-year-olds who are scared of their penises. And the few transhumanists who said have actually managed to breed and have kids, it's like they're shocked. How did that happen? They got 2 kids. Okay, they at least fucked twice. How did that happen? Was it a clinic? All right. Okay, transhumanist is like the least sexy thing you could ever think of, because it's actually a Platonist attempt to escape from sexuality. It's the contemporary pillar saint in it's par excellence, as Slavoj Žižek always says, right? So if you want to look at the contemporary Platonists, that's why I think it's dying. That's why I think Silicon Valley is already over. Silicon Valley is still struggling with woke, and it's actually fighting back on woke. I see a lot of healthy science happening in technology already, and I'm glad it's maturing as quickly as it does right now, because it needs to mature. Because maturing is sexualizing yourself. So listen, I'm going to write a book, right? I'm working on a book which is like a war anthem against the axial age and the pillar saints and the boy pharaohs of the world. I want to bring back sexuality and violence, for that matter, strongly into the human psyche and the understanding of ourselves. And the number one thing is transhumanism is already over. Please, I mean, don't be so fucking nerdish and 8 years old. You still think it's going to happen. There won't be an uploading, because uploading does not entail your genital organs. And if you're going to be uploaded without genital organs, what a horror that would be. Like any guy would admit to me, if I cut off his dick, he would go and kill himself. And I'm sure women would do the same thing without the breast and the vagina. We are deeply sexual creatures.
Someone's background noise is coming in again.
That was probably me. Sorry, because I just wanted to chime in here. So one of the things that Pat Ryan says at his incredible lectures at the Stoa is that copper, being the body of the kind of technological world that we live in, has an association with the alchemical sign, which is the same as the sign for female. So I think that it's really interesting to think of technology and the body of technology as having a feminine form. And I think that we can even see that on an emergent level, just like how the kind of technological environment that we interface with at a phenomenological level is flat and is like oceanic. You know, there's like oceans of information that we're all kind of in this like crazy space where there's no order. It's all flat. And I think this is why, you know, Bard brings in the phallus, right? Because we need to order ourselves within this technological environment that has this kind of feminine form to it. So I think use that principle, the understanding of technology is kind of arising and coming into being through the body of this like feminine force, which is copper. And you know, copper has this great kind of pliable characteristics. It makes sense since it's associated with femininity. And then we have McLuhan coming in and talking about how like the kind of electric age has these like really quickly moving feedback loops that allow for this like interaction and this intimacy and this breaking of distance. And that creates the global village, which puts us right into the center of the town square, like Bard said, where all the women are watching and everybody's starting to get into everybody's business. And of course, that's what we're seeing right now. And that's why, once again, we need to bring in the Bard absolute, right? We need to be like, sorry, we've closed the doors. We are not letting you in. You cannot see what we're doing in here. And we are building we're building our phallus, right? So I think that it's interesting to look at the medium of the internet and our communication medium as such in the form of the feminine, and then bring in the masculine principle and think about that as being our kind of route into the future and the possibility of ordering this like oceanic mess that we're in. And I wonder about sexuality as a way of an experiential way of getting an intuition for this kind of thing, which is why I think you're bringing up the transhumanists as being like totally like veered off in the wrong direction, because they're not engaging with sex. So they don't have this intuitive understanding of the mercurial force of the woman, right? Like the fact that when you're engaging in courtship, everything is constantly changing. Your ideal shifts as you get closer to it. It actually distorts and turns into something else. You realize the thing that you've desired is not the thing that you have. And so there's all of these intuitive things about reality that I think come from exploring the sexual dimension. And that absolutely relates to engaging with women. And you have to do that. You have to engage with this, like the quality of femininity. And that means both men and women themselves dealing with this quality. And that's why I'm like so radical about people getting into sex. like have sex and like figure out what that's like, because you're really dealing with all of these shape-shifting forces, and that gives you a great intuition for how to engage in this world that has all of these principles acting, that you need to kind of have this intuitive nature to. And maybe it's intuitive to me because I'm a woman, but
I could just add to that technology is ultimately the male-female envy. So the ultimate matrix or mammal envy. Remember that two women, female genital organs, matrix mammal, only one masculine is phallus. So this is the envy. So women give birth to children, reproduction. So men dream about giving birth to technology. So the first way is that men play magic tricks to women, and the women laugh, and then they get to fuck the women. That magic has to eventually become something, and that is eventually when we move from yesterday's magic is tomorrow's technology. That is civilization itself. So men dream about creating technology, but just like a woman would prefer maybe to have a son if you ask her, and then love having a daughter when she gets it. It's the same thing with men. Men love to think of technology as giving birth to a son that will survive him. But when technology turns out to be feminine, men love it even more. This is exactly how sexual difference actually plays out. So if technology is what men create to impress women, it's kind of how they give birth. Their ideas materialize. The technology is materialized ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I can also sort of build on that, actually, because one of Lacan's hypotheses of the symbolic order is that it's structured by what he calls the missing phallus. That there's the man it's based on this distinction that's present in Freud of the distinction between having a penis and not having a penis. It's sort of the absence of the phallus. That it's not that man has penis and woman has vagina. It's man has penis, woman does not have penis. So it's the presence of the absence of the penis. Man basically is what he's neurotic about in his ideals and his moralization is basically finding this other phallus, like finding the missing phallus. And I think that this could materialize as technology. That technology is the way man tries to find the missing phallus. That's why, like, for example, like why do we build a rocket ship to go to the moon? Because men who are disconnected from this reality are unconsciously driven for this missing phallus. It's not because they're actually any point of going to the moon. It's because they're unconsciously pathological. And the same thing for the silicon tech transhumanist culture. They're also looking for the missing phallus. And that's why in the modern science fiction universe, what you're seeing emerge as the dominant theme for the transhumanist movement is basically the emergence of the perfect other, like for example, the movie Her, Samantha, or for example, Ex Machina, where basically what you're doing is you're building this perfect other that would manifest, and finally you would be able to interact with the missing phallus. So this fantasy is reemerging, and I think that you know, how this plays out in whatever metaphysics we're developing here with the intellectual deep web is, you know, I mean, super interesting open discussion.
Yeah, like you never see robots, like AI robots, that are men. They're always women. They're always women. Nobody wants to look at a male robot. They just want to look at women. I mean, it's amazing. Like, I think that it truly is a kind of feminine takeover that we're seeing with the internet. Like,
well, I guess female robots are domestic in some way, and then male robots are off, you know, fighting wars or something. But there's nothing aesthetic about a male robot, right?
Weird, you know, metallic kind of thing.
Yeah, nothing aesthetic about it.
It's even worse than that. The Terminator was for kids, but Alien was for grown-ups. So it cannot be interesting unless it's a female body to see the grown-up in it. But I would like to add what Cadell just correctly said is that there's the opposite one, and that's the search for the mamilla. And mamilla was ignored before Julia Kristeva started talking about it in the 80s. And I'd love to talk about mamilla all the time because it's not in Freud, not in Lacan. This is what the woman has in her body the man does not have, or the woman, the mamilla, right? Yeah. But the mamilla here, the two mamillas, the mamilla you come from, which is the motherly mamilla, or the mamilla you come out of. So it's both the matriarch that gave birth to you and your motherly body, the body you came out of, the matrix you came out of, you touch mamilla. Life is a journey from the mamilla towards the phallus, to finally one day kill the phallus and then become either matrix or phallus afterwards. That is essentially what life is. So when we talk about men looking for the missing phallus, the Cadell directly describes, it's the desire to be something more noble, upward, mobile, what men have to have a direction towards. In contemporary society, when we try to kill the phallus, that men get completely freaked out because they're not only looking for the missing phallus and then they fuck the woman and they have to look for it again and again and again, but it's also that the phallus they're looking for is vision and direction to somewhere to go. Where do we go next? What kind of religion do we have? So religion is for men, spirituality for women. The religion is for men to go after what the phallus is. But for women, this is also interesting because women, that means they look at the men who go towards the phallus, they join them in, you know, they hug with them and go in and they go on towards the promised land. But the women then deliver the mamilla. And here's what's so key. What's key to this is that the brothel madam, again, is the key between the original mother and fucking your mother. So you fuck the brothel madam or you fuck the older woman, and then you go into a full-on relationship with the Madonna woman who might be the mother of your children. When you go into that relationship, which is secondary and comes afterwards, when you go to that relationship, you're going back to mamilla. You sexualize mamilla. And hey, you're going to fight with your own fucking kids about sucking that tit on that woman's body. But it's not going to be your mother's tit. It's so interesting that Kristeva exposed this in the 1980s. There's something eerie about a tit that looks like a mother's tit that you sucked because you had to turn around when you're 1 year old and hate the thing you love the most in life. This is the objectPTR that looks for everywhere, that we look for, the object we look for everywhere. So what I'm doing in my work is that I'm discussing the mamilla as the object we're missing and looking for all the time. So we can go for phallus as the project we're missing and looking for all the time. We do the both the men and women. We do the both the men and women. We're looking for the phallus to give us the direction of where to go. And the women look for the men to do it so they can join in. That's why the heritage is always on the men's side, and the hierarchy is supposed to be male. So the women can join in and play their part and get their share out of it. But the women are then offering the mamilla back to the man of the sexual act. So it's between phallus and mamilla all the time, not phallus and matrix. Sexually, we're between phallus and mamilla.
Okay, was it Weston who was asking the question, or because he has? I think you have a follow-up, right?
That was Hal, but Weston also does have some questions.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Hal, is there anything you want to just respond to before we get to Weston's question?
I mean, not anything particular. There was a lot. I was both looking for and not looking for. But I mean, I think, in terms of like the phallic or whatever, I mean, you see like that whole idea of like men creating machines, men creating like buildings. Of course, you think of Trump or something like that. But then the idea that then this would morph into the feminine, I mean, that's just kind of interesting because I'm thinking of Zuckerberg. Because Zuckerberg created Facebook supposedly just according to the social network because he wanted to get fucked, right? And then, of course, Facebook transformed into what it is today, at least according to under this thesis, a feminine platform. And I think it's also kind of weird how like a lot of these platforms, well, maybe not weird, maybe makes sense, do develop in that way. So you see like Facebook has become like super obsessed with like very motherly concerns. Think about the types of things that go viral on these platforms too, like very feminine things like kittens or knitting or something like that. Like very stereotypically feminine things go very viral on all of these platforms.
Mm-hmm.
But women are half the population. Mark Zuckerberg married his mom. He didn't marry a woman. She even cuts his hair. He's only 11. He's not even 12 yet. End of issue.
Okay, Weston, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions?
Hey, yeah, sure. So, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Cool. My question was just about, because you guys actually brought up like this whole aspect of what technology is missing, and just as somebody who is in that space and works in technology, I'm kind of curious, like, how do us straight men that are primarily occupying the positions of building these technologies, I guess, bring our proper role to the feminine platforms that they've become, I guess, according to this panel here. I'd just like to hear some of your thoughts, or maybe also clarify whether or not you guys as a panel are saying that it is too feminine or whether it's too masculine. Because I think the one thing that we're all clear on is that there's obviously something kind of wrong or missing about the way that we're doing technology and communications, I think, because I kind of tend to think about technology as it goes into the future as like our primary means of communication, and obviously that's been kind of
I want to say
more
that
clear because of the pandemic.
Okay.
I don't think. Hold on. I don't think that I'm saying that these networks are masculine, too masculine, or too feminine. I think the critique is that they're too boyish and immature, and that there's not a proper masculine and a feminine, and that maybe the masculine is involved in the engineering and creating the container, and then for the feminine spirit to enter, and maybe there's a dynamic there. But I don't want to, complain about.
We're gonna have all the things that were wrong with the previous society thrown at us, and that's exactly what we have in children's diseases everywhere. And Facebook just repeated MySpace's mistake, and Facebook will be gone within no time at all. It's just not the future. The thing is this: you can't design masculine or feminine in this sense, and it's stupid to do it. If you're an architect today and you plant a lawn, you plant the lawn. You don't put the paths there. You wait another year and wait and see how people walk across the lawn. Then you put the lawn there. Any sort of Platonist architecture is dead. The whole point with the Deleuzean architecture in the late 20th century was that we should now create environments that are human friendly. And at least that's why you put gardens on top of rooftops and things like that. So that's the future of architecture. That's a given. That means that half the population are masculine and half the population are feminine. The last time I checked, that's like 4 billion of each. That's evolutionary environments. I don't worry when people let their own nature, the social biology, speak through them into their needs and where they go. That quickly develops evolutionarily and gets adapted to humans. I'm worried about Platonist little boys who try to decide how we're going to live our lives and become tyrants over technology. That's what I'm scared of. Because if you just create evolutionary open environments and landscapes and use tons of open source to begin with, out of that will come the nodes that we call plurality in our work. It's very feminine, right? Start with the feminine. Out of that will come the nodes that will rise as phalluses out of it. And we have algorithms to point out which one of these ones work. Now, if the algorithms don't get corrupted by money or manipulated by politics or conform by academics, meaning if all the old institutions are out of the way, and algorithms can just be free and open towards human expression as it is, then in the Deleuzean way, you will find an internet that will eventually grow and mature. Just get the Platonist architects out of the way. They're the ones we need to get rid of.
Any follow-up, Weston?
Well, let me also maybe give some perspective that might help Weston, because my view is that if you want to know what's gone wrong with the technology and the technologist space, pay attention to the theories of communication and information in the cybernetics revolution. Because in, for example, Shannon information, they were able to develop a theory of information opposite to the theory of entropy in physics, But what was missing, basically, they were able to develop a theory of information that would open up the information revolution. But what was missing from that theory, and is well known in cybernetics, is the meaning. So you can have zeros and ones, you can have transfer of information technically, but what's missing in their theory of information is the meaning. And that's why now what do we say? We have a meaning crisis. So we don't have a theory. So the technologists have the technical understanding of information and communication, but they're totally operating in a dead universe. So I think that this is the gap that Bard's speaking to, which is that the question that comes up is we have the ability to develop very advanced technology, but we don't know why we're doing it, and we don't know what the consequences of it for the human environment. So what I'm saying is that when you're developing the technology, there needs to be a deep relationship. And this we saw at the manifesto leadership meeting yesterday. We need to have a deep relation. Look, we have a split within academia between the STEM fields, which are masculine, and the humanities, which have been ripped of the phallus. There's no phallus in the humanities. And that's why the STEM fields don't respect the humanities anymore, because there's no phallus there. So what we need to do is we need to take the best and brightest engineers and tech people, and we need to take the best and brightest philosophers and deep thinkers, and we need to have them be interacting constantly. Because if you just have the machines and the technology, but you don't have the meaning and the purpose and the why. So like what I will say is, for example, we can build a large hadron collider, but why? Or we can build these advanced social networking platforms, but why? So we need to have a deep, constant conversation, and the humanities needs to have the phallus back.
I would just say too, just to connect this to this idea of the dark renaissance, I think what's so amazing is that the unity, the bringing together of these two asymmetrical forces. We could think of this within the context of sex, because there's specialization, right? You know, like having a technical knowledge of something is a hard task where you have to basically extend your cognition into the way of being of a machine. And that kind of creates that's a kind of particular type of person. And then the people in the humanities are extending themselves into this organic realm, you know, where they're working with myth, with all sorts of things that cannot be, you know, you need membranics essentially to like understand what's going on within the realm of human beings. You need emergence, you need to understand complexity, because these are things that cannot be definitively divided. They're all interconnected, and we're seeing ourselves, and even in this conversation, you know, turning things, pulling out and emphasizing one aspect of something, but it's still stuck to this other complex, this like whether or not it's trinity or it's a paradox or a contradiction. And that's kind of how, you know, the slushing of dialectics moving, these things are entangled with each other. You need to have this kind of brain, this synthetic kind of, I would say, queer brain, in order to really conceptualize these things and be able to wield the power. And unity of these forces, like the bringing together of these things with the phallic gaze, with observing that which people are not brave enough to see and to confront and talk about, that is like has the possibility of creating such an incredible scene and bring forth this like dark renaissance that's technological, radically technological, and also phallic, and also rooted in the deep understanding of human beings. And
the three sexes that you're describing, right? The need for all three of them, right? You know, this triad seems to be in the humanities. It might be overweighted in, you know, in the feminine, and so, on some level. But you know, a lot of artists have been sort of bisexual anyway, and so there is a queer aspect to probably the humanities, which is less present maybe in the technological world, but then all these realms could use all of these three elements. That's what. Yeah,
the thing is that the shamanoids are here, and we're hearing the people, and they be called in, and we're all part of that. But we don't want to be role models for anybody. That was the big mistake after 1945, because after the phallus disappeared and there were no male role models around at all, then the men started mimicking shamans. And young men are not supposed to mimic rock stars who go and kill themselves on drug overdoses when they're 35. Okay, in my world, to kill yourself on a drug overdose at 35 is normal. Perfectly normal, to be even cherished, right? That's my world, but not a world for a guy who goes towards a mortgage and want to get married and have 3 kids. That was Camilla Pagla's prophetic point all along. I'm not here to be a role model. That's why you and I, Andrew, and Thomas talked a lot about the difference between Sutra and Tantra, because Tantra is essentially just an environment where it's impossible to mimic something. You have to invent who you are.
Well, that's the art. That's the art.
Not all
We're
people need to
the
go.
art world now.
Artists need to go there, certainly, because artists need to move into the shamanoid androgynous, or as we call it now, queer sphere. And the queer sphere is between men and women, and the queer sphere is between tribes. But it's not where men are located, should be comfortably located in the outer circuit. The women should be firmly located in the inner circuit. If you go towards tribal mapping and get it right this time, maybe the shaman can walk into the square and give his vision of things through art exhibitions and all kinds of things, and give his distorted dark Renaissance version of what's going on, and force people to rethink and go through transformative experiences, which is what shamans are great at, but not to mimic the shaman. I am, after 30 years in the music industry, so fucking tired of people who can't love themselves for being craftsmen or teachers or whatever they do in their everyday lives and think they're all going to be rock stars. Who came up with that idea? You're not supposed to mimic the fucking shaman. He's mad. He dies young and he's not even pretty. Get out of there. Don't go in the shamanoid world. But this was the problem with Christianity all along. We didn't make a difference, a clear difference between the shamanoid world, because Christianity said we should ban it and keep it out of there. And it then only came back as a pressure cooker and tore us apart. And we then exploited the entire planet and almost killed ourselves. The shamanoid needs to be put in its right place, where it should have its own little pride things going on, where queer people are proud of themselves, but they should not interfere with the beautiful relationship between men and women, where over 90% of the population are perfectly comfortable to be.
Okay, we've got 1 minute left, and I think we've touched on the Dark Renaissance. We've definitely explored the sexual apocalypse, and this has been really fantastic. Thank you all for being here.
One last question, though. A lot of the guys here asking about sadomasochism and they're saying that you're tough in bed and the women love to be submissive. Okay, you're just discovering heterosexuality, guys. It always worked like that. And why don't you play around with it at a tantric course and let her dominate you, and it's even more fun. Let's put it that way.
Okay, some more holy words from Alexander. So thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for coming here, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime soon. Please check out all of our lectures and series on Parallax. Parallax is growing. It's developing. We're developing. We're concretizing our ideas and working on it. And we appreciate any kind of help if you want to join Patreon and all that sort of thing. Thank you so much. And I guess vivre the Dark Renaissance and the sexual apocalypse. Take care, everybody.